All right, we are officially jumping into the formal geometry curriculum for this year. This is section 1.1, which is about definitions. I just wanted to make a quick video going over what we did in class for the people who missed the class or people who just wanted to have a second look. So we start out with this little activity right here. It says shoes come in all shapes, colors, and styles. Some people collect shoes and have hundreds of sneakers in their closet. They're sometimes referred to as sneakerheads. We wear shoes every day, but we don't often stop to ask ourselves the basic question, what actually is a shoe? So what students did in class was in their groups, they came up with a definition of what a shoe is. Now, a lot of these lessons, while I'll record videos, the majority of what we do is actually in the discussion in class and whatnot. So you're not going to get exactly the same experience in class, but I still wanted to put something together for people who are gone. So the answers would obviously vary, but an example would be something you wear on your foot. Okay, now it's way too broad, but they didn't know that yet. So they said something that you wear on your foot. Some people said something you wear on your foot and it protects your feet or something like that. So the students I asked and made sure that they were confident with their definition, that if I showed them an object, that they would be able to figure out if it was a shoe or not based on their definition. And that's what we did. I said, let's pretend like an alien just landed on Earth and came into this classroom and all they knew was your definition of a shoe. When I show you something, don't go over and say that it is not a shoe, because now that you're looking at it, you know it's not a shoe. It's strictly based off your definition. So I showed them several things. These are some of the things that they suggested in the actual curriculum, but what I showed them was first I showed them my Croc, and students said, yes, that is a shoe. And then I showed them some other things that started getting a little bit crazy. Like I took 2 paper towels off the paper towel rack and I put them on the ground, stuck my feet to them and walked around. I said, hey, these go on my feet and they protect my feet. By your definition, is this a shoe? And what students were able to see was that there were several things that by their definition was going to be classified as a shoe. For example, the paper towels I was standing on, by their definition, would be a shoe if they said just something that goes on your feet that protects your feet. So then what students had to do was refine their definition. After they looked at it and found things that they knew were non-examples of shoes and things that were examples of shoes, and they went over and changed their definition a bit. So answers varied again, but a protective covering for the feet that includes a sole and usually worn outdoors. Now, the reason they have the worn outdoors part is because I'm taking this from the key from the curriculum, and their key, they were talking about bringing in a slipper, and people said that slippers weren't shoes, those were something else. So this brought us into discussing how important definitions were and how limiting they were also. So what I mean by that is definitions in the end are made by humans. And you're supposed to be getting input from many different people and coming up with a consensus about what something is and what it is not. But there's always going to be a room for someone to argue one way or the other, say that the definition isn't good enough. For example, a flip-flop, most people would probably say that was a shoe, but I had several students said, no, that goes on your feet. Yes, it's kind of like a shoe, but it's not a shoe. It's a flip-flop. It's its own thing. And the same thing with a boot. They said a boot is a boot. A boot's not a shoe. A shoe is a shoe, and a boot is a boot. They're two different things. While they do the same thing, they're not exactly the same. So once again, definitions are come up by people. It's kind of an agreement between different people on what they're deciding things are going to be, but there's always going to be room for someone to say, I don't know about that. But the goal is to have a definition that the majority of people are going to agree with. And a lot of times it's going to be scientifically backed if it is like something mathematical or in a science class. Now, number 4 here says dictionary.com defines the word shoe as an external covering for the human foot, usually of leather and consisting of more or less stiff or heavy sole and a lighter upper part ending a short distance above, at, or below the ankle. And while we all agreed it was okay, there was a lot of things in here that we didn't love. It said it had to be a human foot. And a lot of us have had shoes for our dogs so that their feet don't burn on the ground. So we said, I don't know about that human foot part. The other part is a lot of us were saying that boots were shoes, And this was saying that it had to end at the ankle. So it seemed like they were limiting it, saying shoes had to be like tennis shoes. So we were looking at this and just finding things that we didn't really love. It seemed pretty wordy. We didn't love the words more or less. But in the end, the whole point of this front page of your notes was for you to learn what it took to write a definition, see that a lot of times you need to refine it, that different people could argue that different things should be in the definition or not in the definition. And then we got to this part, which was our quick notes. The quick notes is basically just connecting things from the beginning of the notes and just putting everything together. So we talked about how good definitions, a lot of times when you're making a good definition, you're going to look at examples and non-examples. So it would have been helpful if I had a group of things that we were calling shoes and a group of things that were kind of like shoes, like flip-flops, let's say, but we were saying these are non-examples of shoes, because that would help you know how specific you should make your definition. The other part was there were these two things that we wanted to do when we were writing our definition. So you're going to want to classify, and that tells you the category or group it's from, and then you're going to differentiate so you can kind of narrow it down. For example, classifying, you could say that a shoe is an article for your feet or something for your feet. That is the category. But there's a lot of things for your feet. So then we went into the fact that it protects your feet, that it has an upper part and a lower part. So we were going over and narrowing it down so that it was strictly talking about shoes. Even saying like something for your feet that protects your feet. Well, that could have been, let's say, a sock. A sock protects your feet and it's for your feet, but it's not a shoe. Or like foot lotion is something for your feet that is supposed to protect your feet, but it's not a shoe. So once again, you kind of get this broad category, but it's still kind of narrowing it down. And then you are going to differentiate so that it brings it down even further. An example of this would be what the students did now is they just tried these 4 problems, but an example of this would have been the 2-part structure for a fish. The category could be saying a fish is an aquatic animal or an animal that lives in the water. Now, unfortunately, that's too broad because it could still be a beaver or whale or something else that lives in the water. So then we go over and narrow it down by differentiating by saying it breathes through gills. So that's the 2 parts. I'm not saying that's the best definition or the most scientific definition, but it's an okay definition. A fish is an aquatic animal that breathes through its gills. The next one, we were working on coming up with a definition if you saw examples and non-examples. So we knew that an obtuse angle is going to be an angle that is going to be bigger than 90 degrees but smaller than 180. Well, I didn't write this in here. I really should have had an obtuse angle is an angle. So the category is an angle, and then I narrowed it down by saying it has to be bigger than 90 and less than 180. The next one, we're talking about the definition of a polygon by looking at examples and non-examples. It is a closed, flat surface made of straight sides that don't cross over one another. And the way that we did this was by looking at the examples and then the non-examples. You could see some of the non-examples are very close to examples. The top left one looks a lot like something in the examples, but it's not because it's not closed. So I knew it needed to have that in the definition. I added in the flat part because like a cube would not be a polygon. The sides would be polygons. So I had drawn that on the board. And the next one just says, why is the following definition for school bad? School is a place where children and adolescents go every day. That's way too broad. So the issue here is that it's not specific enough. It does not talk about the fact that they're going there to learn. There are adults that go to school as well. It doesn't differentiate between school and other places that kids go daily, like home or anywhere else. So that's not a good definition right there. Once again, the definitions are human-made. You're trying to come up with a consensus that most people can agree on. But we were also talking about in class about how some of the big disagreements that people will have in society is by having differing definitions of certain things. And if they both had the same exact definition of something, they could agree upon it, but they both have different definitions of certain things. So definitions are important, but they do have their limitations. Let's take a look over the homework now. All right. Problem number 1 says dictionary.com defines the word bicycle to be a vehicle with 2 wheels in tandem, usually propelled by pedals connected to a rear wheel by a chain and having handlebars for steering and a saddle-like seat. So you were supposed to circle the part that does the classifying, and then you would underline the part that is trying to differentiate. So the classifying would be a vehicle with 2 wheels in tandem. The issue is you can have that being a motorcycle or different things other than a bicycle. So when we go over and differentiate, we're narrowing that down by saying it's propelled by pedals, connected to the rear wheel by a chain, and all that kind of stuff. So you can see the part that is the classify and the part that is the differentiate. This next part right here says use the 2-part structure for writing definitions to write a definition for the word crayon. So it says a drawing device, so that'd be the classify, and then I'm going to differentiate by saying that it is made of colored wax. And there's your definition. On number 3, you are supposed to define what a scalene triangle is. So they have examples and non-examples. You can see all of the examples have no sides that are the same, aka no congruent sides, and then the non-examples were either not triangles or they had some sides that were congruent. So I said a 3-sided polygon with no congruent sides, and congruent means the same length. The next one, it says a widget is a 2-dimensional shape. Each widget has more sides than a triangle, but fewer than 6 sides. Also, widget is not symmetrical and therefore cannot be folded in half. In the space below, draw at least 2 examples and non-examples. So you can see the examples of the widgets. Neither of those are going to have less or 3 or less sides or more than 6 or more, and they are not symmetrical, meaning they can't be folded in half. And then the non-examples, you can see I had a square, and then I had an equilateral pentagon. Next one, a bird is an animal that can fly. How well does this definition correctly follow the 2-part structure? It does, because it's talking about classifying it's an animal and it differentiates, it can fly. Is it an appropriate definition? No. There's a bunch of animals that can fly that are not birds, and then there are birds that cannot fly. So this is just not a great definition, even though they tried to follow the 2-part structure. And then lastly, it's talking about the manager of a local restaurant is trying out a new free refill policy for soft drinks. However, employees are having a difficult time enforcing the policy. Customers are requesting free refills in unattended ways, such as asking for refills in cups that they brought from home, asking for refills in cups that were purchased days or weeks before, and asking for refills of drinks other than soft drinks. So you were supposed to come up with a definition or a phrase that basically is going to give a policy that has kind of the definition of what is going to be a free refill. So it says, we offer free refills on soft drinks on the same day of original purchase in the same container and with the same beverage that was originally purchased. And there you go. All right, and that would just be an example. All right, hopefully this made sense. We're talking about definitions, what goes into making a good definition, the fact that definitions are human-made, so they do have their flaws, but that the goal is to find a general consensus of what an object is and what it is not. Thanks for watching.